So our first topic is my conversation with Trevor Potter, a renowned election lawyer. So Trevor, if you'll come up and join over here, I will proceed there. We're going to, I think, go over there. Trevor Potter is the president of the Campaign Legal Center, which he founded in 2002, and he now leads the CLC's efforts to advance democracy through law. Trevor served as chairman of the Federal Election Commission and as general counsel to John McCain's 2000 and 2008 presidential campaigns. He is perhaps best known for his recurring appearances on the Colbert Report as the lawyer for Stephen Colbert's super PAC, Americans for a Better Tomorrow, during the 2012 election. The American Bar Association Journal has described Trevor as hands down one of the top lawyers on the country on the delicate intersection of politics, law, and money, not necessarily in that order. He's also taught campaign finance law at the universities of Virginia and Oxford. And with all of that really fantastic background, it's a good thing that we just happen to have had an election recently. So, how's it going with voting in America? Is it working for democracy?
Well, it's great to be here to see many former colleagues and friends, and I've been a longtime supporter of checks and balances, rule of law. So how is it going? First thing is good news, and there is good news. As we all saw, it's the dog that didn't bark. We did not have widespread violence. We didn't even have any reported violence that I've seen. The election system, some places creaky and slow, worked. They're still counting in California and a few other places. I can't figure out why they're still counting in Alaska, but they are. So all the concerns we had that the election system would be disrupted by domestic violence or protests or problems did not come through. Part of that is the really hard work of election officials over the last 4 years, trying to confront election denialism and explain the transparency of the system. There was a concern that there would be external disruptions, and by and large we didn't see that. There was this weird blip in Georgia of what we are told, and I don't know how we know it, of Russian interference and bomb threats in Democratic polling places, but they coped with that pretty seamlessly. So the good news is the election system produced a winner. I would note, Alan, that you said the American people spoke, and they spoke clearly. I'm less clear what they said. We may end up getting into that. They certainly said they preferred Trump over Harris by 51 to 49, I think, when we're all done, although it's getting closer as California counts. But I think it's worth noting that when you look at the exit polls and the reasons people voted the way they did, I'm not a political scientist, but favoring an authoritarian government and opposing democracy was not high on the list. In fact, interestingly, 75% of voters said they were concerned about threats to democracy, and there were more Republicans who said that than Democrats. And so if you think about that a moment and parse it through, that was clearly the child of 4 years of saying the last election was stolen and we can't trust the results. I am hopeful that some of the messaging now can be, gosh, I guess we can trust the results, and that the system has legitimacy.
So last time there was the Stop the Steal movement that you referred to. Maybe the popular vote counts were not that different, but in terms of the cohorts voting in the particular swing states, if they didn't exactly say what they meant clearly, they pulled the levers clearly. And we really didn't see any significant litigation or legal issues in the independent state legislature theory, which was a big issue 4 years ago. Is it dead or alive? We really haven't seen legal cases, right?
Well, actually, we have. They've been lower key. They're there. and a number of them are going forward post-election, so for a room full of lawyers, worth noting. There is the last-minute issue that went out of Virginia up to the Supreme Court on voter registration purges and the federal law that says you can't make significant changes and challenge people in the last 90 days because it is hard for them to respond in an adequate time period. And we were talking about the week and 2 weeks before the election where the governor of Virginia was removing people from the voter rolls. The interesting thing there is the district court, the Fourth Circuit, said you can't do this, it is in clear violation of federal law. And then the Supreme Court on the emergency docket, either 6-3 or 5-3, we don't know because there's no opinion, stayed the lower court's opinions and allowed the governor to continue. We're talking 1,600 people. Most of them could go ahead and register same day. So it wasn't a game changer, but the issue is there. It's on the Supreme Court docket. We don't know if they thought the statute meant something else, or is there a constitutional problem with the statute? So that's there. Absentee ballot issues, there are a whole series that are sort of lined up now. The Fifth Circuit issued what I think is an outlier opinion that said that it violates the federal statute for states to count ballots that are cast before the election but arrive and are therefore opened after the election on the basis that election day is Tuesday. And so that's a live issue going forward. Big push in 2 states on overseas voters. Presumably a political calculation, they were more likely to be Democratic, but in both Pennsylvania and North Carolina, there are challenges to overseas voter registration, and there's a federal statute that's in place, so that'll still be there. There is, coming out of this, an independent state legislature case, I think brought only to bring the issue back to the Supreme Court, and that's out of Pennsylvania, where the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court said that the Constitution allowed something called the curing of ballots. When absentee ballots are received, they could notify voters there appeared to be a problem with their ballot, and the voters could come in and correct it. And the Republican Party committee sued, saying that wasn't permitted under state law. The Supreme Court interpreted it and the Constitution differently. That is teed up for the Supreme Court of the United States. Again, I think trying to push this argument that state Supreme Courts can only go so far in interpreting their laws and constitutions. So that'll be a live issue.
That sounds really familiar. I think I may have signed on to an amicus brief on that issue. Why is it we can't get the absentee ballot process regularized and in a way that there aren't always problems? So I believe in the Pennsylvania case you're talking about in Philadelphia, the question was some voters, voters like other people make mistakes and didn't put their ballot in a secrecy sleeve so that when it was opened, you could, I suppose, presumably see who the ballot is, so that's not accounted, and then they were provided notice that they could somehow cure it. Why is there so much ambiguity in this process? And also, why is it that the Republicans in this case, but in many cases, assume these absentee ballots and overseas ballots in your example are going to favor one side or the other? Do we really know that?
Yeah, the great questions in there too. The first question about Pennsylvania, I hope the rule of law society ends up concentrating on Pennsylvania because they have a big scarlet letter on them at the moment. They are doing a number of things wrong. They have a polarized legislature. They are unable to fix the laws. But problems are, they're one of the 2 big states, key states, that does not have pre-processing of absentee ballots, so they're not allowed to touch the ballots until Election Day. Part of the issue in this curing case is, could they hold them up? Would that be okay? And feel that they didn't have a secrecy envelope in them without opening them, because they're not allowed to under state law. So they need to fix that and do what other states do.
Apparently there is a machine
Yeah, it weighs
that
them.
actually weighs
Yeah.
the envelope to see whether there's a reasonable basis to conclude?
So Pennsylvania should do pre-processing, and they would, except the Republicans in the legislature basically said, yeah, we should, so what are you going to give us to do it? And it turned into a partisan food fight. So that's one big issue there. The other issue in Pennsylvania is this way in which they are so localized that different election officials and different counties have different standards for what they're allowed to do. Bush v. Gore, anyone? And we could have, if Pennsylvania had been really close and some counties cured and some counties didn't cure, that would be a problem. So standardizing it would be really helpful. Your bigger question is, what is going on with absentee ballots? And I think that is worth looking at. The people in Republican lawyers' world know that for years absentee ballots were the Republican Party's secret sauce. They spent tens of millions of dollars perfecting this and banking their vote in advance. Along came Trump, I don't think we really know why, and decided that they were the devil's creation and a terrible thing. So we suddenly saw in 2020 a partisan divide where Democrats trusted them and were urged to use them. Republicans were told not to. And so legitimately last time there was a preponderance of Democratic votes in absentee and mail ballots in the states that allow both. Remember that 5 or 6 states do 100% mail ballots. So that's a whole different issue. But for the partisan calculation, I think Republican lawyers came out saying we should make it as difficult as possible to count absentee ballots because they're on average maybe 60-40 more likely to be Democratic votes. But is that still true? This year, you had Trump saying both bad and good things. You had his daughter-in-law at the RNC saying, please vote by mail, remember to vote by mail. They spent money encouraging people to. So I'm not sure where they're going to be on this issue. Voters like them, it's more convenient. So it may be that Republicans just decide that was a delusion and that actually they should go back to being competitive in absentee ballots. But for the moment, this litigation is we want to cut as many absentee ballots as we can off from being counted, and that's what's giving us all this.
I think that vote by mail encouragement had more to do with trying to get out the mail vote. The bro vote is really what they were thinking about there. So the next question really doesn't, I think, have any partisan or ideological flavor to it at all, but California. Why does California, the returns of the techiest state, the biggest state, most resources, why do the results come in like the next calendar year? I mean, why is that?
Couple reasons. It's the right question, and clearly we all think they ought to fix this somehow. It's mail-in, huge volumes of mail. It is allowed to return after Election Day so long it is postmarked before. So even while they're counting, there's still ballots arriving. So that's one issue. The other, I was at a conference today, and so I'm only going to repeat what I was told. I don't have a footnote for it. The California ballot had 70 different issues or offices on it. It was pages. Arizona was all upset because they ended up with a 2-page ballot, which meant everything had to go through machines twice, and they were worried about the machines breaking. So if 2 pages is bad, what I'm told is something like a 7-page California ballot has got to be very difficult to process.
And maybe direct democracy, plebiscite items, ballot initiatives that people take the time to read. And anyway,
We don't, but...
But, all right, we've been serious long enough. So what about Elon Musk? I mean, you asked us to concentrate on Pennsylvania, and, so what is he up to both in that state and elsewhere?
So that actually, I think, is a serious question. Let me take this room back to something you all remember, which is something called Buckley v. Vallejo. When the Supreme Court said you cannot limit individual speech and individual campaign spending, as long as it is not coordinated with any candidate or party committee, as long as it is wholly and completely independent of candidates and party committees. And that gave us the ability of Billionaires to go out and spend, in his case, $200 million in what we're told is primarily Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin and Michigan, in complete coordination with the Trump campaign. Now, they did that because the FEC had said that the anti-coordination rules only applied to advertising and not to door knocking, get out the vote, targeting, etc. I've got to say I'm almost speechless because that is clearly not what the Supreme Court said. They created this hole for individual unlimited spending by billionaires, including the richest man in the world, on the basis that the candidate wouldn't be indebted to them, they wouldn't be able to talk to the candidate about where to spend their money, and yet that's exactly what we've seen. So I think we have, for those who care about it, a serious theoretical problem here at the heart of our campaign finance laws, where we are seeing something that has real implications. Somebody who is going to directly benefit from government spending and contracting and all of that, who will be close to the president and able to help himself and hurt competitors, who got there by virtue of spending $200 million that under the Supreme Court theory he shouldn't have spent. I think it's a true issue. I would only say, I don't think I'm going too far off your path, I would only say 10 years ago, I was asked by a German reporter who was talking about campaign finance issues and so forth, what I thought of the role of the oligarchs. And I said, well, I don't know anything about Russian politics, so I really can't answer that. And he said, no, I mean the American oligarchs. This came out of left field. I really was flummoxed. I think 10 years later, we are seeing the role of American oligarchs, people who are converting economic power into political power. And that's a very different thing for this country, and one both constitutionally and otherwise I think we need to think about.
Could be a real problem for the people who drove here in their Teslas and find out they can't recharge on the way out. All right, so in terms of getting voting in elections perhaps working better for democracy, are there any reforms to the electoral system, electoral college issues, state voting compacts? Are there some reforms that could, objectively speaking, nonpartisan basis, enhance the contribution of elections to democracy rather than hold it back?
Yeah, I mean, we say states are the test tubes, the laboratories of democracy. There have been a number of initiatives on the ballots in states. The last couple years, they have generally passed and made reforms. So you have independent redistricting commissions in a number of states that came about through citizen initiative. You have dark money disclosure in Arizona. You've had states like Alaska adopt ranked choice voting. This year, the gears went in reverse. I think there were 6 or 7 proposals for ranked choice voting, open primaries in some combination, and all but the District of Columbia lost. Some by substantial 60-40 margins. The last update I saw, the attempt to repeal the Alaska open primary top 4 or 5, I think it is, candidates, was razor thin. Yes is ahead by 4,000 votes with 40,000 left to be counted. But something has happened. One of them is the Republican Party has officially come out against ranked choice voting because they thought it didn't favor their candidates in Alaska and Maine, which have had it. So that issue, which I would have said before the election was a likely change, is suddenly not a likely change. So you have that. Electoral college, in a way, we're quite fortunate that we didn't have, again, a split between the popular vote and the electoral college. It's going to be close, but we didn't. Is there anything that could be done to change the Electoral College? There's the National Electoral College National Popular Vote Compact, which lawyers who've looked at it, many in this room I'm sure, are skeptical about in terms of does it work, would it be constitutional, et cetera. There are a range of other questions. To me, they're interesting and relevant to people who care about our democracy, because we've ended up in this strange place where the entire election appears to be decided by 7 states. And if you look at the downsides of that, the big drop in voter turnout is the other states. Those 7 are all higher than they were, yet the overall turnout in the election is lower because states like New Jersey and so forth, our votes don't count. And so chunks didn't vote. Is there anything to do about it? You could have constitutional amendments, but how are you going to get bipartisan agreement on it? I would say the one that I'm interested in and looking at that's been proposed is to have an amendment that does 2 things. One, get rid of the physical bodies of electors. If this had been a 270, 268 election or a 269, 269 situation, we'd all be sitting here talking about faithless electors and the 18 states that don't require their electors to vote the way the states voted. That's a problem. And you could have the same electoral college system and just say the states cast their votes and they're counted by Congress. You don't have to have the people who served a completely different function when it was originally conceived. But the other possibility, which I think might be appealing to the other 43 states, is some sort of proportional electoral vote where each state casts votes based on the proportion of population of the vote in the state, which makes every state suddenly a swing state. It means candidates would be campaigning Democrats in California and Republicans in Florida because they'd be in play. And that, I think, is worth looking at.
I think the problem with ranked choice voting, it's just too complicated. It's like scoring in pickleball, and we don't have time for you to explain it. And there are a couple of big issues that I'd like to get to before we hand the microphones over to the next panel that's going to be, I think, very interesting. Open primaries, would that lead to less partisanship, possibly, and maybe a more centrist approach?
It makes a lot of sense that the district voted for it. Because we are a one-party voting system here. And so everyone who is not a Democrat, i.e. Republican or independent, which is a significant number of voters, are left out under a closed primary system. They don't get to participate in who's on the general election ballot, and that person will win. There are complicated constitutional arguments about the party's right to nominate versus citizens' right to participate. But generally, the courts have come down saying that if you have a system, whether it's top 2 in California or top 5 in Alaska, where candidates have access to the ballot, it is constitutional. And from a political science perspective, what it means is you have a much bigger electorate involved in who's on the ballot. You don't have the 2 parties selecting their most extreme candidates in closed primaries. Instead, you have a better shot at getting somebody in the middle of the road, somebody who has broader support. That's the theory.
So we were going to address the very serious problems affecting voting in so many states of non-citizen voting and people voting without proof of citizenship. That's a tremendous problem that we'll have to leave for another day. But going back to the point about centrism and where most of the country is on most issues, which is to say in the middle, I take it on good authority that you have some experience and knowledge on third-party candidates and possibly new parties. Do you see a new and improved Whig party possibly forming?
So Alan knows that my particular experience in this field was being hired by Michael Bloomberg a number of years ago to figure out how he could mount successfully an independent candidacy for president. And, very complicated access laws in all of the states, and we did all of that work and figured out that for a billionaire, you could spend the $100 million. It was then estimated to do it, and you could get on the ballot. And we went through this whole thing and did the presentation, and you get to the smart client at the end of the day saying, so, and then he turned to his political people and said, so what did the polling tell you, and how would this work? And they said, well, we think if you got on all these ballots and you did what we think you could do as an independent, you could probably prevent either of the major party candidates from winning a majority in the Electoral College. It's possible you might even be the leader in the Electoral College vote, but you won't have a majority, so it'll go into the House of Representatives. And he said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, that means that it's going to elect a Republican or a Democrat, not you. So the third party route always runs into that problem, as Bobby Kennedy saw this year when he was trying to figure out how to do this. I think in the first past the post system we have, it is very difficult, and there's a long history, John Anderson and Perot and everyone else, where as you get closer to the election, the candidate withers because people say, well, they're not going to get elected, so I don't want to throw my vote away. And I don't see how you get around that, and I don't want to minimize these barriers that the two parties have created in every state. You saw the Democrats going after Kennedy to get him off ballots. The system is rigged against a new party. We're not back in the days of Lincoln, where the Whigs could sort of disintegrate and the Republicans could come on, because they didn't have a ballot access system and they didn't have all these laws created by the two major parties to keep competitors away.
Well, the Know Nothing Party has come back, hasn't it? Yeah. All right, we've got, we don't even have 60 seconds, but just ethics. We're going to conclude on the question of, do you see the issue of candidates adhering to ethical standards, making disclosures, participating in normal transition processes very quickly, and then we have to turn it over to the next group.
This is going to be 2016 on steroids. You may not have noticed, but the Trump campaign has not signed the MOU with General Services that's required by law to participate in the transition because they object to Trump having to agree to an ethics code or to spell out an ethics code for him as president. He wasn't in a blind trust. He won't be in a blind trust. There will be debates again that go nowhere in the courts over the emoluments clause. I think we're going to be in a situation where we have lots of ethics issues and probably not good ethics answers.
I have a feeling there's going to continue to be a lot to talk about over the ensuing years, but we can't continue it now. So Trevor, thank you for your really incisive and astute observation.